So I wanted to start with a few questions for you to think about. As a student, if you've ever been in a class or a seminar where the temperature of the room was so hot that you felt like you were going to fall asleep, or it was so cold that you were shivering so much and you couldn't concentrate. Not the most conducive place for learning. What about if you were in a class or a seminar and there was construction going on outside? Again, probably didn't have the best time learning. You were distracted and couldn't really pay attention to what was going on. Have you ever been in a class or a seminar to where the instructor was not prepared or didn't have the content knowledge that was needed to effectively disseminate that information? Either of those situations are pretty frustrating, right? Now, switch it around if you're a teacher and you are in an environment where you feel like the success of your students is solely your responsibility, that you're not getting any help from anyone else for the student's success, whether it's permission slips not being signed, homework not being turned in, parents not answering phone calls, parents not addressing discipline problems or problems that are coming into the classroom from home. Again, very frustrating. And then how many of you feel like you've benefited from knowing someone from a different background than yourself? Whether it's a socioeconomic background, a cultural background, or a religious background. Has it widened your worldview of understanding of how you look at things through a different lens or with someone else's experience? So most of us today have never lived in a time where there wasn't diversity. We've always lived with diversity of those categories: socioeconomic, religion, or cultural. We can't imagine living any other way. That's all we've ever known. Horace Mann, however, was an educator who recognized all these problems and used his background in education and political influences to make the necessary changes for a more effective and inclusive education system. Growing up in the United States during a time when many changes were going on, Horace Mann was a child who was mainly educated by his father, who was a very strict Calvinistic teacher and taught in that very strict environment. Mann was given very little time for rest and play. Instead, he was always expected to study. His father thought that the only way to have a good professional life was to have a high-class education, and that meant studying all the time. Also at that time, the Protestant church still had the major influence over the education system, and that led Horace Mann to make changes. Diverting from most but not all of the tactics used by his father in his own education, Mann saw the education of a student as a holistic endeavor. So what that means is he believed that students, if they were not provided with environments that were conducive to learning, that they wouldn't be able to get the full benefit of that education that was provided. This included things like sound building structures that had proper ventilation and heat in the school buildings. He also made sure that playgrounds were provided in the areas at the schools. He also believed in proper education for teachers. He knew that for teachers to be effective and to deliver content effectively, that they needed to be content experts. He pushed for a formal education for those teachers because he saw teachers as the driving force of the education of students and the community as a whole. What Mann was most widely known for was the development of the common school. This concept was the forerunner for what we have of our public schools now. He believed that offering free education to all students, no matter what their background or status. So using his political influence, Mann was able to convince all that were involved that these schools should be funded by tax revenue. He believed that education was the great equalizer. He believed that truly the better way to a better society was to invest in that society itself. So the Bible itself states that man was created in God's image, and this is true for all mankind. The Bible also talks about man being knit together, mind, body, and soul. Jesus speaks of the church working as a body, working together, and if all parts work together, then it's able to accomplish the common good. Therefore, the philosophy of man is biblically based. This is a theme that has continued to permeate throughout our history, as given the example of the I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As a nurse, the part of man's philosophy that resonates the most with me is his holistic idea of education. Seeing the student as a whole and having many influences to learning mirrors the philosophy of Florence Nightingale during the Crimean War. She put into motion groundbreaking philosophy or groundbreaking practices that included healing the whole person and not just the wounds or the illnesses. The ability to provide this wholeness to students and do that with the separation of church and state does have its place. However, the inability to provide a Christian worldview into an education does a great disservice to our students. We as educators have a duty to our students to provide them with all the information that they need to create a efficient, all-inclusive, and complete education.